Hey, you ever stop and think what goes down when a legend like Morgan Freeman, the voice that's narrated our collective consciousness, pulls up to a crumbling school and witnesses a teacher's heart shatter for her students? It's a crisp autumn morning in Detroit, the kind where frost clings to windshields and breath forms clouds that hang in the air like unspoken prayers. The brick facade of Westside Elementary stands worn but proud against the pale blue sky, its windows reflecting the early sunlight that does little to warm the chill settling into the bones of the neighborhood. Morgan Freeman steps out of a modest black sedan, his weathered hands clutching a coffee cup and script pages for the educational documentary his production company is filming. He's early, deliberately so. Experience has taught him that the real story always reveals itself in the unguarded moments before cameras roll, in the authentic rhythms of life unfolding without an audience. "We'll set up in the library in about an hour," he tells his production assistant, a young woman named Sophia who's furiously typing notes into her tablet. "I'd like to walk around a bit first, get a feel for the place." Sophia nods, understanding this is part of his process. Morgan has always believed that to tell a story with truth, you must first absorb its environment, let it seep into your pores until you can feel its pulse. The hallways of Westside Elementary smell of floor cleaner and old books. Inspirational. Posters with curling edges line the walls, their optimistic messages a stark contrast to the water stains on the ceiling tiles above. Yet there's an undeniable warmth here, a sense of purpose that transcends the physical limitations of the building. Morgan turns a corner. The sound of a classroom in session draws him forward. Room 137. The door is partially open, and through the crack he can see a woman in her mid-30s standing before a whiteboard covered in math equations. Ms. Catherine Chen, according to the nameplate beside the door. Her movements are graceful and precise as she explains fractions to a class of fifth graders. Her voice carries a gentle authority that commands attention without demanding it. Morgan pauses, not wanting to intrude but captivated by the quiet intensity of the scene. "Who can tell me how we simplify this fraction?" Ms. Chen asks, pointing to an example on the board. Several hands shoot up, but Morgan's attention is drawn to a thin boy in the second row, whose stomach suddenly growls loudly enough to be heard from the doorway. The child, Jamal he hears the teacher call him, shrinks in his seat, his face burning with embarrassment as a few classmates snicker. What happens next stops Morgan in his tracks. Ms. Chen smoothly redirects the class's attention to the board, giving Jamal a moment to recover his dignity. Then, as the students begin working on a practice problem, she casually walks to her desk, retrieves a brown paper bag from her drawer, and places it on Jamal's desk as she passes by to check another. "Students' work. Would you mind taking this to the office for me during lunch break?" she asks quietly. Ms. Roberts needs it. The boy nods, understanding flickering in his eyes, a silent communication that speaks volumes. Morgan Freeman has observed enough human behavior in his lifetime to recognize what he's witnessing. A teacher giving away her own lunch to a hungry student, disguising it as a favor to preserve the child's pride. His breath catches like he's just taken a punch. This isn't about a photo opportunity or a scripted moment of inspiration. This is raw, unfiltered compassion playing out with no audience, no recognition. As Ms. Chen continues teaching, Morgan notices other details he might have missed at first glance. Her shoes are well-worn but meticulously polished. The sweater she wears has been carefully mended at the elbow. The classroom itself is a testament to creativity overcoming limitation. Handmade educational materials cover the walls, and the bookshelf in the corner holds volumes that appear to be her personal collection rather than school property. The bell rings, signaling the transition to the next period. As students file out, Morgan steps back, not wanting to be discovered observing. He watches as Jamal lingers behind, the paper bag clutched in his small hand. "Miss Chen," the boy says hesitantly. "This is your lunch, isn't it?" Catherine Chen kneels down to his level, her voice barely a whisper. Then his stomach growls louder than before. Her hands tremble slightly as she squeezes his shoulder gently. "You need it more than I do today, Jamal," she says. "Besides, I have a teacher meeting with snacks. I'll eat there." It's a lie delivered with such compassion that it almost sounds like truth. But yesterday you— Jamal, she interrupts softly, you're one of my brightest math students. And what do we know about math? It helps us solve problems, he recites. That's right. Well, this is just another problem solved. Now go on to gym class. Mr. Diaz doesn't like tardiness. As Jamal walks away, Morgan sees Catherine Chen's facade momentarily crumble. She steadies herself against her desk, a fleeting expression of exhaustion crossing her face, before she straightens her shoulders and prepares materials for her next class. Outside the classroom, Morgan approaches Sophia, who's been looking for him. Find out everything you can about Ms. Chen in room 137, he says quietly. Is there a problem with the interview schedule? Sophia asks, concerned. Morgan shakes his head, his eyes still fixed on the classroom door. No problem, just a story I wasn't expecting to find. What kind of story? Morgan is quiet for a moment, considering. The kind that matters, he finally says. The kind most people never see. As they walk toward the principal's office, Morgan Freeman feels something stirring. Within him, a recognition that transcends the documentary they came to film. In this unassuming classroom, in this struggling school, he's glimpsed something rare and precious. A teacher whose love for her students manifests not in grand gestures, but in the quiet sacrifice of her own meal, her own comfort. This isn't about championships or awards or recognition. This is about a promise of sorts, an unspoken vow made by one human being to care for others, regardless of the personal cost. And something about Catherine Chen feels hauntingly familiar, though he can't quite place why. As he contemplates this sense of déjà vu, Morgan Freeman makes a decision that will set in motion events no one at Westside Elementary could anticipate, least of all Catherine Chen herself. What he doesn't yet realize is that this chance encounter will soon unearth a promise from his past and lead to a moment that will stun everyone. The principal's office at Westside Elementary bears the hallmarks of a leader doing the best with limited resources. Barbara Wilkins sits behind a desk cluttered with grant applications and budget spreadsheets, family photos in mismatched frames, providing the only personal touch in the utilitarian space. Mr. Freeman, what an honor, she says, extending her hand. The children are thrilled about your documentary. We rarely get this kind of attention. Morgan settles into a chair that's seen better days, his presence somehow making the small office feel both smaller and more significant. Principal Wilkins, I'm hoping you can tell me about one of your teachers, Catherine Chen. Something shifts in Principal Wilkins' expression, a subtle mixture of pride and concern. Ms. Chen is extraordinary. Why do you ask? I observed her. Class this morning. She gave her lunch to a student. The principal sighs, the sound carrying the weight of a familiar burden. That would be Jamal. His family lost their apartment last month. They're staying with relatives while trying to find affordable housing. She pauses, studying Morgan's face. And yes, Catherine does that regularly, not just for Jamal. How regularly? Morgan asks, his deep voice gentle but persistent. More. Often than she should. Principal Wilkins leans forward. Ms. Chen has been with us for 12 years. She's had opportunities, private schools, wealthier districts, but she stays. Says these kids need her more. Morgan nods, mentally noting the parallels to the scripts he's been reviewing. The dedicated teacher remaining where needs are greatest, regardless of personal sacrifice. But something about Catherine Chen's story feels unusually compelling, almost familiar. What else can you tell me about her? She's our most requested teacher. Parents fight to get their children in her class because she gets results, especially with struggling students. She holds multiple after-school programs, math club, reading intervention, all volunteer work. Principal Wilkins hesitates. But between us, I worry about her. She's running herself into the ground. The lunch situation, is that an isolated incident? The principal's laugh holds no humor. Hardly. We had a free breakfast program until budget cuts 3 years ago. Since then, Catherine started bringing extra food. It began with granola bars and fruit, but now— She shakes her head. I've spoken to her about it, reminded her that she can't save everyone at her own expense. She just smiles and changes the subject. Morgan's production assistant knocks softly, handing him a preliminary background report on Catherine Chen. He glances at it briefly, then returns his attention to Principal Wilkins. "Do you have a school cafeteria manager I could speak with?" 20 minutes later, Morgan sits across from Gloria Martinez, the cafeteria manager whose no-nonsense demeanor softens when Catherine Chen's name is mentioned. "She has an arrangement with me," Gloria explains, checking to ensure they're alone in the empty cafeteria. "Every Monday she gives me money to cover meals for certain students whose accounts are empty. Tells me to keep it between us." "How many students?" "Started with 3 or 4, now it's 14. Gloria's eyes reflect both admiration and worry. "That's nearly $200 a week from her own pocket. I've told her it's too much, but she insists." "Does she keep records?" Gloria retrieves a small notebook from beneath the counter, opening it to reveal neat columns of initials and notes. "JW, no dairy. TC, extra protein when possible. MR, likes vegetables. Give seconds." She closes the book. She remembers all their preferences, their allergies, everything. "I've worked in school cafeterias for 30 years, Mr. Freeman. Never seen dedication like hers." Morgan thanks Gloria and steps outside to call Sophia. "What have you found on Catherine Chen?" Graduated from Michigan State with honors. Master's in education from Wayne State. Completed at night while teaching full-time. Lives in an apartment about 2 miles from the school. No car, takes the bus. Parents were Chinese. Immigrants, both deceased, no siblings. Sophia pauses. "One unusual thing, there's almost nothing about her online. No social media, minimal digital footprint. In this day and age, that's practically unheard of." "Keep digging," Morgan instructs. "I want to know where she grew up, her childhood, everything." As Morgan hangs up, he notices a janitor carefully cleaning graffiti from a wall. The man's methodical work reminds him of Catherine's precise movements at the whiteboard. "Excuse me," Morgan approaches. "Do you know Ms. Chen?" The janitor, Raymond, according to his name badge, straightens up. Recognition flashes in his eyes at seeing Morgan Freeman, but he maintains his composure. "Ms. Chen? Sure. Best teacher. In this building. Why do you say that?" "She's the only one who makes sure her kids clean up after themselves. Teaches them respect for the building, for my work." Raymond's voice softens. "And she brings me coffee sometimes. Remembers how I take it." "Does she ever ask for help? For herself?" Raymond shakes his head. "Not for herself, no. But last winter, when Zoe Chen's family, no relation to Ms. Chen, couldn't afford a winter coat, she asked if I had any old coats from my kids. Then I saw Zoe wearing a brand new coat the next day." He shrugs. "Ms. Chen said she found one at a thrift store, but I know what new looks like." More pieces of the puzzle, Morgan thinks. Each conversation reveals a teacher stretching herself thinner to catch students who would otherwise fall through widening cracks in the system. Later, outside the art room, Morgan observes Catherine helping a boy prepare for a presentation. She straightens his collar, her movements gentle as she adjusts a tie that's clearly borrowed. "You look very professional, Damien," she says. "The scholarship committee will be impressed." "What if they ask something I don't know?" the boy asks, anxiety evident in his voice. "Then you'll say, 'That's an excellent question. I don't have the answer right now, but I'm eager to learn more.'" She smiles. "Honesty with confidence, remember?" The boy nods, standing taller. As Catherine sends him off, Morgan notices her discreetly slip a folded bill into the art teacher's hand. "For the application fee," she whispers. His mum couldn't quite manage it this month. As Catherine turns to leave, she finally notices Morgan watching. A flicker of recognition crosses her face, not of Morgan Freeman, the celebrity, but something deeper, more personal. It vanishes quickly, replaced by polite curiosity. Morgan feels it too, a strange sense of déjà vu he can't place. Before either can speak, Sophia approaches with an urgent message, and the moment passes. Back in his temporary office, Morgan reviews what he's learned. Catherine Chen, dedicated teacher spending nearly a third of her salary on students' needs. No family, minimal personal life. Beloved by colleagues and students alike. But why does she seem familiar? Why does her story resonate so deeply? "Sir," Sophia interrupts his thoughts. I found something interesting. Catherine Chen wasn't born in Michigan. She's from Clarksdale, Mississippi. Mississippi, Morgan's hometown. The connection sparks something in his memory, a fragment of a promise made long ago. Get me everything. On her childhood in Mississippi, Morgan says, his voice taking on a new urgency. And check my filming schedule there in the 1980s. As Sophia leaves, Morgan stares out the window at the playground where Catherine Chen is now supervising recess, giving up her prep period to ensure a special needs student can participate with classmates. The investigation has only begun, but Morgan Freeman already knows. Catherine Chen's story is one that needs to be told, and perhaps one that's intertwined with his own past in ways he's only beginning to discover. Morgan sits alone in his hotel suite, the city lights of Detroit, twinkling through floor-to-ceiling windows. The luxurious surroundings stand in stark contrast to Westside Elementary's peeling paint and water-stained ceilings. On the mahogany coffee table before him lies a manila folder containing Catherine Chen's background information, delivered by Sophia an hour earlier. He takes a sip of bourbon, savoring the warm amber liquid as he opens the folder. His eyes scan the documents inside. Birth certificate from Clarksdale, Mississippi, 1985. Elementary school records showing exceptional academic performance despite difficult circumstances. Newspaper clippings of scholarship announcements. A faded photograph of a young Catherine receiving an award, her mother standing proudly beside her. Her mother. Morgan's hand freezes mid-air, the familiar features in the photograph sending a jolt of recognition through him, Elaine Chen. The name materializes in his mind before he even reads the caption. Impossible, he whispers to the empty room, but the evidence stares back at him, undeniable. Elaine Chen, a woman he hasn't thought about in decades, smiling beside her daughter, her eyes reflecting the same quiet determination he'd witnessed in Catherine's classroom. Morgan closes his eyes, allowing memories long buried to surface. Mississippi, 1988. He was filming Glory at the time, one of his earlier significant roles. The production had hit a crisis, a critical location lost at the last minute, threatening the entire shooting schedule. Elaine Chen had been the unlikely savior of that crisis. A talented cook who ran a small restaurant on the edge of Clarksdale, she had connections throughout the county. When she overheard the film crew's predicament while serving them lunch, she made a phone call to her cousin, who owned Property Perfect, for the scene. By evening, the production was back on track, but that wasn't all. Morgan remembers how Elaine worked double shifts to prepare food for the crew when their catering service failed to show. How she brought her small daughter, 8-year-old Catherine, to the set, the girl sitting quietly with her schoolbooks in a corner, occasionally watching the filming with wonder in her eyes. The memory of Catherine as a child suddenly crystallizes. A serious little girl with a notebook full of math problems she worked on between observing the film magic happening around her. Morgan had been impressed by her focus, how she seemed to absorb everything while remaining respectfully quiet. Then came the incident that had bound them together, however briefly. The final day of shooting in Clarksdale, Morgan had found Elaine in tears behind the restaurant. Her husband had left months earlier, leaving her struggling to make ends meet. The restaurant was failing. She worried about Catherine's future. "She's so smart, Mr. Freeman," Elaine had said, wiping away tears. "She deserves better than what I can give her." Morgan, moved by her dedication, had made a promise. "I'll help with her education. When she's ready for college, contact me." He had written his agent's information on a slip of paper, pressed it into Elaine's hand and meant every word. But Elaine had never called. The years passed, his career soared, and the promise faded into the background of a life filled with accolades and new commitments. Now that promise has resurfaced in the most unexpected way. Morgan rises from his chair, crossing to the window. The weight of unfulfilled obligation settles heavy on his shoulders as he stares out at the city's skyline. Why hadn't Elaine contacted him? What had happened in the intervening years? He returns to the folder, searching for answers. A local obituary provides one. Elaine Chen died 2003 after a brief illness. Catherine, then 18, had just started college. On a scholarship, His phone rings, breaking the silence. "Mr. Freeman," Sophia's voice comes through. "I found something else. Catherine Chen's mother worked on the set of Glory in 1988. There's a production photo with you both." "I remember," Morgan says quietly. "I just realized it myself." "There's more," Sophia continues. "According to records, Catherine's college scholarship came from the Mississippi Education Foundation. It's not much, but it's all I could find about her financing." Morgan thanked her and hung up, his mind racing. The Mississippi Education Foundation. He'd donated to it several times over the years, but never tracked which students received support. Had his money indirectly helped Catherine? After all, it seemed like a hollow coincidence compared to the direct assistance he'd promised. He pulls out his own worn leather journal from his travel bag, flipping through decades of notes until he finds what he's looking for. A small photo tucked between pages from 1988. It shows him standing with the crew, and at the edge, almost out of frame, stand Elaine and little Catherine Chen. Morgan traces the image with his fingertip, memory and regret mingling. He'd meant to help directly, to ensure Catherine had opportunities worthy of her potential. Instead, she'd made her own way, scraping by on scholarships and determination. And now she was doing the same for her students, giving from her limited resources to ensure they didn't fall through the cracks, just as her mother had done. The parallels are too strong to ignore. Morgan sees now how Elaine's spirit of sacrifice lives on in Catherine, the same willingness to work double shifts, to give when it hurts, to put others' needs before her own. It's a legacy of compassion passed from mother to daughter, a legacy he could have supported had he been more attentive to his promise. Morgan reaches for his phone again, this time calling his longtime personal assistant Martha, who has been with him for nearly 30 years. "Martha, do you remember Elaine Chen from the Glory shoot in Mississippi? The woman who saved the production?" "Of course, you promised to help her daughter with college. The confirmation stings." Martha remembers, which means the promise was real, not just a faded memory, possibly distorted by time. "Did she ever contact us about it?" Martha's hesitation speaks volumes. "Yes, once, shortly before she passed away. You were filming overseas. I took the message, but—" She pauses. "It was a chaotic time. I'm afraid it may have gotten lost in the shuffle. I'm sorry, Morgan." The weight of this revelation settles over him. Not only had he forgotten his promise, but Elaine had reached out when she knew she was dying, likely trying to secure her daughter's future. And through a simple administrative oversight, that final request had vanished. "It's not your fault, Martha," he assures her, though his voice carries the heaviness of shared responsibility. "But I need to make this right." After hanging up, Morgan returns to the documents on the table, seeing them with new clarity. Catherine Chen isn't just a dedicated teacher he happened to observe. She's the living embodiment of a promise unfulfilled, a debt he carries without her knowledge. Tomorrow, he decides, he will observe Catherine's class again. Not as a documentary narrator, but as a man seeking to understand the woman she's become, in the absence of the support he once promised. And perhaps if the moment is right, he will find a way to honor that long-delayed promise without diminishing the remarkable path she has forged on her own. Morgan carefully places the photo of young Catherine and Elaine back in his journal, a tangible reminder of the past that has unexpectedly collided with his present. Some shadows, he reflects, follow us not to haunt but to guide us toward redemption. The morning air is still dark when Morgan's car pulls up across from Catherine Chen's apartment building. The modest three-story structure with its faded brick facade stands in stark contrast to the luxury hotel he left 30 minutes earlier. At 5:15 a.m., most windows remain dark, but a soft glow emanates from a third-floor corner unit. "That's hers," Sophia confirms, checking her notes. "Third floor, apartment 3C, Morgan nods, settling in for the wait. He's no stranger to observation. His career has been built on watching human behavior, absorbing nuances, understanding motivations. Today, he's applying those skills not to a character, but to Catherine Chen, the woman whose childhood intersected with his past. At 5:40 a.m., Catherine emerges from the building's front door. Even from a distance, Morgan notes her practical efficiency. Hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, clothes modest but professional, a heavy tote bag over one shoulder and an insulated lunch cooler in her opposite hand. The cooler appears too, large for a single person's meal. Morgan's suspicions about her continued food provisions confirmed. She takes the 5:47 bus, Sophia whispers, though there's no chance of being overheard from inside the car. That's the only route that gets her to school before 6:30. Sure enough, Catherine walks briskly to the corner bus stop, joining two other early morning commuters. When the bus arrives, she greets the driver by name before disappearing inside. "Follow, at a distance," Morgan instructs his driver. "I want to see her whole routine." The bus makes several stops before Catherine disembarks 3 blocks from Westside Elementary. Morgan watches as she detours into a small grocery store, emerging 5 minutes later with an additional plastic bag. More supplies, he surmises, purchased from her meager salary. At Westside, Catherine uses her key to enter through a side door. It's 6:25 a.m., nearly 2 hours before students will arrive. "I'd like to see what happens inside," Morgan says. Principal Wilkins has provided access, understanding Morgan's interest in documenting dedicated educators. When they quietly enter the building, they find Catherine alone in her classroom, transforming the space in the early morning quiet. She unpacks fresh pencils, carefully sharpening each one. She replaces a student's worn notebook with a new one, transferring the name label with deliberate care. From her cooler, she organizes small meals and snacks, each with a discreet label, not names but initials that would be meaningless to casual observers. At her desk, she grades papers with remarkable focus, writing lengthy, encouraging comments on each assignment. Morgan notices how she tailors her feedback. Simpler language for struggling students, more challenging questions for those who excel. When other teachers begin arriving at 7:30, Catherine transitions seamlessly into collaborative mode, sharing materials she's prepared, listening to colleagues' concerns about specific students, offering solutions without condescension. By 8:15, when students start filtering in, Catherine stands at her classroom door, greeting each child by name. Morgan, observing from the adjacent empty classroom, is struck by the individual attention she gives each interaction. "Good morning, Zoe. Did your brother feel better after that medicine?" A nod from the girl with tightly braided hair. "Marcus, I'm looking forward to your presentation today. Remember to project your voice." A nervous smile from a boy clutching index cards. "Jamal, I have those basketball statistics you asked about. We can look at the percentages during math." The hungry boy from yesterday lights up with genuine excitement. The sucks. Morning lessons showcase Catherine's teaching gifts. Her math instruction weaves real-world applications into abstract concepts. When explaining fractions, she uses examples from cooking, construction, and sports, connecting with diverse student interests while maintaining academic rigor. During a writing exercise, Morgan notices how she kneels beside struggling students, providing individualized guidance without drawing attention to their difficulties. Her voice remains consistently gentle yet firm, her expectations high but not unrealistic. When lunch period arrives, Catherine orchestrates a subtle distribution system. Some students help her organize materials in exchange for the extra snacks she happens to have. Others receive birthday treats, though Morgan suspects it's no one's birthday. A few simply find food waiting at their desks when they return from washing hands. Instead of eating her own lunch, Catherine uses the break to make a phone call. Morgan edges closer to overhear. Yes, this is Ms. Chen calling about Marcus Wilson's glasses prescription. The family's insurance situation is still pending, but he needs those glasses to see the board. Yes, I can cover the deposit until the paperwork clears. I'll stop by after school. After hanging up, she quickly eats a small apple, her entire lunch, before using the remaining minutes to prepare afternoon materials. The afternoon brings a fire drill that sends students into the playground. While other teachers chat in clusters, Catherine counts her students repeatedly, then notices a small girl shivering without a jacket. Without hesitation, she removes her own cardigan and wraps it around the child's shoulders. When school ends at 3:30, most teachers begin packing up. Catherine's day continues. 6 students remain for her after-school math enrichment program, not all academically gifted, Morgan notes, but all receiving her enthusiastic attention. At 4:45, as the last student leaves, Catherine finally sits, exhaustion briefly crossing her face before she rallies to begin organizing for tomorrow. Morgan slips away, instructing his driver to wait near the bus stop. At 5:20, Catherine emerges from the school, her tote bag seemingly heavier than in the morning, filled with assignments to grade. Instead of heading toward the bus stop, however, she walks in the opposite direction, toward a neighborhood of small houses with chain-link fences. Morgan follows at a discreet distance. 6 blocks later, Catherine stops at a modest house where a middle-aged man sitting on the porch straightens up at her approach. "Ms. Chen," he says, surprise evident in his voice. "You didn't need to come by." "I wanted to check on Jamal," she replies. "And I brought some groceries, just basics." The man's pride and gratitude battle visibly on his face. "It's temporary," he says finally. "The factory promised I'll be back next week." "I know," Catherine assures him. "Jamal's doing great in math. He might qualify for that summer STEM program." They chat for a few minutes more before Catherine hands over the grocery bag and continues on her way. Morgan notices how she waits until she's out of the man's sight before her shoulders slump slightly with fatigue. Her next stop is a pharmacy, where she picks up the glasses she'd called about earlier. Then an apartment building where she delivers the glasses to Marcus's grandmother, refusing the woman's offer of payment with gentle insistence. By the time Catherine finally boards the bus home at 7:10 p.m., Morgan has witnessed a day defined by continuous giving of knowledge, resources, time, and compassion. "She's been doing this for 12 years, Sophia says quietly. "Every day." Morgan nods, his expression solemn. "At this rate, she'll burn out completely. No human can sustain this level of giving without support." As they drive past Catherine's bus, Morgan catches a glimpse of her through the window. She's fallen asleep, her head resting against the glass, one hand still clutching papers to grade when she gets home. "What's our next step?" Sophia asks. Morgan watches Catherine's bus recede, in the distance his decision already forming. "Tomorrow we learn about her students. I need to understand what they see in her." But he already knows what he's witnessed today, a woman fulfilling the promise of her mother's legacy, giving everything she has to ensure her students don't fall through the cracks, just as Morgan once promised to do for her. A promise he intends finally to keep. Morgan arrives at Westside Elementary during recess, watching from a distance as children spill onto the asphalt playground. Their energy contrasts sharply with the tired infrastructure, rusted swing sets, faded hopscotch patterns, a basketball hoop missing its net. Yet the space buzzes with the resilient joy that children somehow maintain even in challenging circumstances. "I'd like to speak with some of Ms. Chen's students," Morgan tells Principal Wilkins, who walks beside him. "With parental permission, of course." The principal nods. "I anticipated that. I've arranged for you to meet a few of them during study." Period. "Their parents have signed releases for your documentary." An hour later, Morgan sits in a small conference room that doubles as the teacher's break area. The walls are lined with motivational posters and district policy notices, a coffee maker in the corner producing a brew that smells better than it likely tastes. The door opens, and Jamal Wilson enters, the same boy whose hunger had first drawn Morgan's attention to Catherine Chen. Up close, Morgan can see the details that distance had obscured: worn but meticulously clean clothes, sneakers with carefully colored-in scuff marks, a watchful intelligence in his eyes that belies his 11 years. "You're really him," Jamal says, awe, momentarily overcoming his natural reserve. "Morgan Freeman," Morgan smiles warmly. "I am, and you're Jamal. Thank you for talking with me today." "Ms. Chen says your movies tell important stories," Jamal says, settling into a chair across from Morgan. "She showed us a clip from Glory when we studied the Civil War." "Ms. Chen is right about storytelling," Morgan replies. "Which is why I'd like to hear your story, Jamal. Tell me about her class." The boy's initial nervousness fades as he begins to speak. "Ms. Chen makes math make sense. Before her class, I thought I was bad at it. She says there's no such thing. Has bad at math, just people who haven't found their way into it yet. And you've found your way? Jamal nods, pride evident in his posture. I'm helping younger kids with math now. Ms. Chen started a peer tutoring program where 5th graders help 3rd graders. She says teaching others is the best way to learn. As Jamal continues, Morgan guides the conversation toward more personal territory. I understand things have been challenging at home lately. The boy's expression shifts, wariness returning. Dad lost his job at the factory, but it's temporary, he adds quickly, echoing his father's words from yesterday. How has that affected you? Jamal studies his hands. Sometimes there's not enough food, but we're okay. And Ms. Chen helps with that. She helps everyone. Jamal's loyalty is fierce and immediate. Not just with food. When Dad couldn't help me with my science project because he was looking for work, she stayed after school 3 days straight. We built a working solar oven. Did you know she was giving you her lunch that day I saw you in class? Jamal looks up, surprise evident. Her lunch? She said it was extra. The realization dawns slowly on his young face, the understanding that his teacher had sacrificed her own meal. Morgan sees the complex emotions this knowledge triggers, gratitude, concern, and a kind of protective indignation on Catherine's behalf. She shouldn't skip lunch, Jamal says firmly. Dad says growing brains need protein. Your dad sounds wise. He is. He's teaching me to fix things. That's how we save money. The conversation continues, revealing a child navigating poverty with remarkable resilience, bolstered by both a father's love and a teacher's unwavering support. When Jamal leaves, Morgan is struck by how the boy's dignity remains intact despite his circumstances, a testament to both his home environment and Catherine Chen's approach to helping. Next comes Maria Diaz, a quiet girl with careful speech and watchful eyes. Like Jamal, she relaxes once the initial intimidation of meeting Morgan Freeman subsides. My parents work at night, she explains when Morgan asks about her family. Puppy cleans office buildings downtown, and Mama works at the hospital laundry. They leave at 10 p.m. and come home after I go to school. That sounds difficult. Who takes care of you at night? My older sister, but she has her own baby now. Mostly, I take care of myself. Ms. Chen gave me an alarm clock and taught me how to make breakfast. Maria smiles slightly. She made me practice cracking eggs until I could do it without getting shells in the pan. Does she help your family in other ways? Maria nods. When Mama got sick last winter and missed work, Miss Chen brought us groceries. She said it was from the school program, but there is no school program. I checked. The girl's perceptiveness doesn't surprise Morgan. Children living on the margins often develop acute awareness of the systems around them. She teaches us things other teachers don't, Maria continues, unprompted, like how to open a bank account or why credit cards can be dangerous. She says, knowledge is power, especially about money. As their conversation concludes, Maria hesitates at the door. Miss Chen is okay, right? She seems tired lately. The concern in the young girl's voice speaks volumes about the reciprocal care that exists between teacher and student. Before Morgan can formulate a response, Maria adds, we try to help her too, you know. Jamal fixes things in her classroom. I stay and clean the boards sometimes. After Maria comes Tyler Jackson, whose story takes their understanding of Catherine Chen to another level. Tyler's father is battling stage 4 cancer, a reality the boy discusses with the matter-of-fact acceptance children sometimes display toward life's harshest circumstances. Ms. Chen drives Dad to chemo on Saturdays sometimes, when I have basketball practice and can't go with him, Tyler explains. She sits with him during treatment and helps him understand the medical stuff. That's a significant commitment, Morgan observes. Yeah, Dad says she's like family now. Tyler fidgets with his pencil. When I got in trouble for fighting last year, she didn't just punish me. She asked why I was angry. No one else asked that. And why were you? I was scared Dad would die. Tyler's simple statement hangs in the air. Ms. Chen helped me talk to the counselor. She found this group for kids whose parents have cancer. She even drove me to the first 3 meetings until I felt comfortable. By the time Zoe Chen, no relation to Catherine, as Morgan has learned, enters the room, a pattern has emerged across these conversations. Catherine doesn't merely teach these children. She sees them fully, addresses their needs holistically, and preserves their dignity in the process. Zoe's situation adds yet another dimension. Her younger brother, Andy, suffers from severe asthma, and medical costs strain the family's resources. Ms. Chen helped us find a clinic with a sliding scale, Zoe explains. She spoke Chinese with my parents when they didn't understand the insurance forms. Then she found this program that helps with Andy's prescriptions. She speaks Chinese. This detail hadn't appeared in Catherine's background information. She learned for us, Zoe says simply. She said it was important that my parents could communicate about my education without a translator. The revelation stuns Morgan. Catherine had learned a language specifically to better serve her students and their families, an investment of time and effort that went far beyond professional requirements. As the interviews conclude, Morgan sits alone in the conference room, processing what he's learned. These weren't generic tales of a nice teacher who occasionally helped students. Each story revealed Catherine Chen's profound understanding of her students' specific challenges and her tailored, sustained response to those needs. She wasn't just feeding hungry children. She was creating a microsystem of support that addressed everything from practical skills to emotional well-being to family stability. And somehow, she accomplished this on a teacher's salary, with no external resources beyond her own determination. Morgan thinks of his own wealth and influence, accumulated over decades of success, contrasted with what Catherine has managed to achieve with so little. The comparison isn't comfortable, but it crystallizes his growing conviction. If Catherine Chen can create such impact with limited means, what might be possible with the right support? His decision solidifies as he gathers his notes. The documentary they came to film has become secondary to a more urgent mission, one connected to a promise made long ago on a Mississippi film set to a mother who wanted nothing more than opportunity for her daughter. Rain pounds against the windows of West Side Elementary on Thursday morning, matching the grim mood that has settled over Morgan as he prepares for another day of observation. The weather report warns of storms throughout the day, a fitting backdrop for his growing concern about Catherine Chen's unsustainable self-sacrifice. Ms. Chen's car broke down 3 months ago, Sophia informs him as they wait in the administrative office. According to the secretary, she's been taking the bus ever since. Repair costs were too high on her salary. Morgan nods, adding this detail to his mental catalogue of Catherine's mounting challenges. What about her housing situation? Sophia hesitates. That's concerning. I spoke with her building manager yesterday. She's 2 months behind on rent. He's been lenient because she's a good tenant, but corporate ownership is pressuring him for eviction proceedings. The news lands like a physical blow. Catherine Chen, who gives so much to others, is on the verge of losing her home. Their conversation halts as Principal Wilkins hurries into the office, rain dripping from her umbrella. Her expression is unusually tense. Mr. Freeman, I hate to disrupt your schedule, but we're short-staffed today. 3 teachers out with that flu. That's going around. I need to cover a class myself. She glances at the clock. Ms. Chen should arrive any minute. She's always early. But 15 minutes later, Catherine still hasn't appeared. When the phone rings, Principal Wilkins answers with visible relief that quickly transforms to concern. Catherine, are you all right? Yes, I understand. No, please don't worry about that now. Just take care of yourself. She hangs up, turning to Morgan with a troubled expression. Ms. Chen will be late today. The bus broke down in this downpour, and she walked the last mile in the rain. She's stopping in the staff restroom to dry off before class. Morgan exchanges glances with Sophia. May I speak with her briefly when she arrives? Principal Wilkins nods distractedly, already managing the morning's cascading crises. When Catherine finally appears in the doorway, Morgan is shocked by her appearance. Her clothes are still visibly damp despite attempts to dry them. Her complexion is pale except for 2 bright spots of color on her cheeks. Most alarming is the slight tremor in her hands as she sorts through papers in her tote bag. Ms. Chen, Morgan says gently, a moment of your time? She looks up, recognition and something like embarrassment crossing her face. Mr. Freeman, of course. Her voice sounds hoarse, as though speaking requires effort. They step into an empty conference room where Catherine immediately apologizes. "I'm sorry about this morning. It's not usually so chaotic." "No apology necessary," Morgan assures her. "I'm concerned about you. You don't look well." Catherine straightens, professionalism asserting itself. "Just a little cold from the rain, nothing serious." But as she speaks, she sways slightly, one hand reaching for the table to steady herself. Morgan moves forward instinctively, ready to catch her if needed. Catherine takes a deep breath, forcing a smile. "I should get to my classroom. The students will be arriving." "Your health matters too," Morgan says, the words carrying more weight than she can understand without knowing their shared history. "The children are counting on me." With that simple declaration, the driving force of her life, Catherine gathers her materials and heads to her classroom, her posture deliberately straightened against whatever physical distress she's experiencing. Morgan follows at a distance, settling into his observation position as Catherine's students file in. Her performance is remarkable. She conducts the morning lessons with her usual engagement, giving no indication of her deteriorating condition except for occasional sips from a water bottle and a slight raspiness in her voice. By mid-morning, however, Morgan notices concerning signs. Catherine's hand presses against the edge of her desk more frequently for support. Her responses to students come more slowly. Twice she loses her train of thought mid-explanation, recovering quickly but with visible effort. During math instruction, she calls Jamal to the board to solve a problem, something Morgan recognizes as a strategic move to give herself a moment to rest while maintaining classroom momentum. When Jamal returns to his seat, he whispers something to Catherine, who shakes her head with a reassuring smile that doesn't reach her eyes. At lunch period, Morgan watches Catherine distribute her hidden provisions to students with particular needs. Today she doesn't even pretend to eat herself, just sips water while supervising the classroom. When a colleague offers half a sandwich, Catherine declines, claiming she had a big breakfast, a lie Morgan knows is impossible given her morning. Commute crisis. The breaking point comes during afternoon science. Catherine is demonstrating a simple chemical reaction, mixing vinegar and baking soda for a lesson on acids and bases. As she explains the principles, her words suddenly slur. She grips the demonstration table, blinking rapidly as if trying to clear her vision. "Ms. Chen," Maria asks, alarm evident in her voice, "are you okay?" Catherine attempts to respond, but instead her knees buckle. The beaker of vinegar crashes to the floor as she collapses, students crying out in fear and confusion. Morgan rushes into the room, reaching Catherine just as Jamal and Tyler have moved to support their fallen teacher. Her skin burns with fever under his touch, her breathing shallow and rapid. "Get the nurse," he commands the nearest student, who bolts from the room. Catherine's eyes flutter open, confusion giving way to mortification as she realizes what's happened. "My class," she whispers, attempting to rise despite her obvious inability to stand. "Stay still," Morgan tells her firmly. "Help is coming." The school nurse arrives moments later, her assessment quick and professional. She's severely dehydrated and running a high fever. This isn't just from walking in the rain, she's been ill for days. The nurse looks up at Principal Wilkins, who has also rushed to the scene. "She needs medical attention. I'm calling an ambulance." Catherine's protest is immediate but weak. "No, too expensive, I'll be fine." "This isn't negotiable," the nurse says, already dialing. As they wait for emergency services, Morgan kneels beside Catherine, who drifts in and out of coherence. In a moment of clarity, she grips his sleeve with surprising strength. "My students," she whispers urgently. "Jamal's father's interview is tomorrow. He needs his dress shirt ironed. It's in my bottom desk drawer, and Zoe's brother has a doctor's appointment. The referral form is in my blue folder. Someone needs to make sure they get to the clinic, and Tyler—" "Catherine," Morgan interrupts gently, "you need to focus on yourself right now." Her eyes lock onto his, fierce despite her weakened state. They have no one else. The ambulance arrives, and as paramedics prepare Catherine for transport, the school nurse pulls Morgan and Principal Wilkins aside. "It's not just dehydration and fever," she says quietly. "She's malnourished. I've been concerned for months, but she always dismisses my questions. From what I can piece together, she's been skipping meals regularly to feed her students. And she's been using her health insurance to cover medical costs for a student's family, Principal Wilkins adds, the full picture of Catherine's sacrifice becoming clearer. As the paramedics wheel Catherine out, her students watch with tears streaming down their faces. Jamal steps forward suddenly, pressing something into Catherine's hand, a small paper crane folded from notebook paper. "You told us origami helps healing," he says, his young voice breaking. "You gotta come back, Ms. Chen." Catherine's fingers close around the crude paper creation, a tear slipping down her cheek. Morgan makes his decision in that moment, turning to Sophia. "Follow that ambulance. Make sure she receives the best care available. Use my personal insurance information if needed." As the ambulance doors close on Catherine's pale face, Morgan confronts the reality. His documentary subject has become a personal mission. The woman who has given everything, including her health, for her students needs someone to fight for her with the same fierce dedication. And Morgan Freeman, who once made a promise to a mother about her daughter's future, intends to be that someone before it's too late. Morgan paces the hospital corridor, his usual composed demeanor giving way to restless energy. Through the partially open door, he can see Catherine Chen sleeping, an IV delivering fluids and antibiotics to combat the pneumonia that had been developing for days while she ignored her own symptoms. She'll recover physically, Dr. Patel had informed him an hour earlier. But Mr. Freeman, this isn't just about the current infection. Ms. Chen is showing signs of chronic exhaustion, nutritional deficiencies, and stress-related health issues. Without significant lifestyle changes, she'll be back here within months, perhaps with more serious consequences. Sophia approaches, coffee in hand. "I've compiled the information you requested," she says, offering him both the coffee and a tablet. Morgan takes both, scanning the document she's prepared. It outlines Catherine's financial situation in stark detail. Teacher's salary of $4,600 annually, student loan payments of $410 monthly, rent of $895 for her modest apartment. And the most telling figure, an average of $840 monthly spent on student needs, from food to school supplies to emergency assistance for families. She's spending nearly 20% of her pre-tax income on her students, Morgan says quietly, the mathematical reality reinforcing what he's already witnessed. And that's a conservative estimate, Sophia adds. It doesn't include the gas she used to drive students to appointments before her car broke down, or the intangible costs of her time and energy. Morgan hands the tablet back, decision crystallizing. It's time to call in the team. Within hours, the hospital's small conference room hosts an impromptu strategy session. Diana Lewis, executive director of Morgan's Foundation, has flown in from New York. Marcus Jenkins, his financial advisor, joins via video conference. Sophia completes the core team, while Martha, his longtime personal assistant, coordinates logistics remotely. "A one-time donation won't solve this," Diana states after reviewing the situation. "Catherine would likely give most of it away, and we'd be back where we started." Morgan nods, having reached the same conclusion. "We need something sustainable that addresses the systemic issues while honoring Catherine's specific approach." "What exactly are you envisioning?" Marcus asks, always focused on practicalities. Morgan stands, moving to the window that overlooks Detroit's skyline. "Not charity. Catherine Chen doesn't need our pity. She needs proper resources to continue her mission effectively. For the next 2 hours, the team develops the framework of what Morgan comes to call the Elaine Chen Educational Equity Initiative, named for Catherine's mother. The multifaceted plan grows beyond a simple funding mechanism into something more comprehensive, a permanent endowment providing nutritional support for students at Westside Elementary and 4 other high-need schools in the district. An emergency assistance fund for families facing crises that impact student performance. A teacher support program providing stipends for classroom supplies and professional development. An advocacy component addressing policy issues around school funding and teacher compensation. "Initial funding?" Marcus asks. $10 million, Morgan replies without hesitation, with a structure that encourages matching donations from other foundations and corporate partners. Diana raises an eyebrow. That's significant, even for you. It's appropriate, Morgan says simply. The amount represents not just his financial capacity, but the seriousness of his commitment, both to Catherine's work and to the promise he made to her mother decades ago. As the meeting concludes, Morgan remains behind, staring at the whiteboard, covered with their planning notes. The initiative is taking shape, but something still feels incomplete. You're thinking about her dignity, Sophia observes, accurately reading his expression. How to help without making her feel like a charity case, Morgan nods. Catherine Chen has built something remarkable through sheer force of will. This can't feel like we're taking over or suggesting she was doing it wrong. What if she helps? Design it, Sophia suggests. Make her the expert consultant who shapes how this works in practice. The idea resonates immediately, not just consulting, leadership. Catherine's intimate knowledge of student needs and effective interventions would be invaluable in translating their financial resources into meaningful impact. We'll create a position, Morgan decides. Director of Student Support Services. She can continue teaching. I know she wouldn't want to leave the classroom entirely, but with reduced hours and a supplemental salary to coordinate the program. With the professional framework solidifying, Morgan turns to the personal component of his plan. He needs to understand more about Elaine Chen and the promise he made, to honor it properly through this initiative. The next morning, while Catherine continues recovering, Morgan boards a private plane to Mississippi. 3 hours later, he stands in Clarksdale outside the small building that once housed Elaine Chen's restaurant. Now a laundromat, the space bears no trace of the place where he'd made his promise decades earlier. Morgan drives to the local cemetery, where he finds Elaine's modest grave marker. Standing before it, he feels the weight of unfulfilled obligation. "I'm late, Elaine," he says softly to the stone, "but I'm here now." From the cemetery, Morgan visits the county records office, piecing together more of Elaine and Catherine's story through public documents. He learns that after Elaine's death, their small house had been sold to cover medical bills. Catherine, then a first-year college student, had lived in campus housing year-round, working multiple jobs to supplement her scholarship. His final stop is the local historical society, where a volunteer helps him locate photographs of Clarksdale from the 1980s. In one faded image of a community festival, he spots Elaine and young Catherine in the background, the mother beaming with pride as her daughter displays a science project ribbon. "May I get a copy of this?" Morgan asks, the photograph, completing a connection he needs for what comes next. Back in Detroit the following day, Morgan meets with Principal Wilkins to share the outlines of his plan. Her initial shock gives way to tearful gratitude. "This will transform not just our school, but the entire approach to supporting vulnerable students," she says, reviewing the proposal. "Catherine's approach works," Morgan explains. "She just needs the resources to make it sustainable, without sacrificing herself in the process." "She won't easily accept help for herself," Principal Wilkins warns. "Her entire identity is wrapped up in being the provider, not the recipient." "I'm counting on that," Morgan replies. "This isn't about helping Catherine Chen. It's about amplifying her impact and honoring her mother's legacy." The mention of Elaine prompts a question from the principal. "How exactly do you know about her mother?" Morgan shares the abbreviated version of his connection to Elaine Chen, explaining the promise made and unfulfilled. Principal Wilkins listens, with growing understanding. "So this isn't just a random documentary subject who impressed you," she concludes. "No," Morgan acknowledges. "Though Catherine would have impressed me regardless, what she's built here deserves recognition and support on its own merits." As they finalize details for implementing the initiative, Morgan adds one crucial element, an event where the program will be announced, designed as an educational opportunity for Catherine's students rather than a publicity moment. "We'll need to get her there without tipping our hand," he says. Principal Wilkins smiles. "Leave that to me. If there's one thing that will get Catherine Chen to show up anywhere, it's an opportunity for her students." With the plan taking final shape, Morgan visits Catherine in the hospital one last time before her scheduled release. She's sitting up in bed, already grading papers despite doctor's orders to rest. "You're a hard person to keep down, Ms. Chen," he observes from the doorway. She looks up, embarrassment and determination warring on her face. "Mr. Freeman, I hope this hasn't disrupted your documentary too severely." "On the contrary," he replies, taking a seat beside her bed. "It's revealed exactly what I needed to see." Catherine studies him with the perceptive gaze he's come to recognize, the teacher's ability to sense when there's more to the story. For a moment, Morgan considers revealing everything. The connection to her mother, the promise, the initiative being created in Elaine's name. Instead, he simply says, "Your students miss you. They're planning something special for your return next week." The mention of her students brings immediate focus to Catherine's expression. "How are they? Is Jamal's father's interview?" "Everything is being handled," Morgan assures her. "Principal Wilkins has made sure of it." Relief visibly washes over Catherine, allowing genuine exhaustion to show through her carefully maintained facade. Morgan recognizes the opportunity to plant the seed for what comes next. "Your class has been invited to an educational event at the Detroit Educational Conference Center next Friday," he says casually. "Something about mathematics in real-world applications. Principal Wilkins thought it would be perfect for them." Catherine's eyes light up despite her fatigue. "That would be wonderful for them. Especially Jamal and Tyler. They both respond so well to practical applications of abstract concepts." "Then it's settled," Morgan says, rising to leave. "Rest. Now, your students need you at your best." As he walks out of the hospital, Morgan feels the pieces falling into place. The plan born of an old promise and new determination is ready. Now comes the moment to transform Catherine Chen's solitary struggle into a sustainable legacy that honors both her work and her mother's memory. Catherine Chen's apartment looks different in daylight. Smaller, more austere than Morgan had imagined, based on his pre-dawn observations. The walls are a neutral beige, unadorned except for a few framed student drawings and a single landscape photograph of Mississippi wetlands. Bookshelves overflow with educational texts and carefully organized teaching materials. The furniture is minimal, functional, and visibly worn. "Please excuse the mess," Catherine says unnecessarily. "The apartment is impeccably clean, just sparse." "I don't often have visitors." She's been home from the hospital for 3 days now, her natural color slowly returning, though she still moves with a cautiousness that betrays lingering weakness. She gestures Morgan toward the small couch, while taking the room's only armchair for herself. "I appreciate you stopping by, Mr. Freeman, but this really wasn't necessary," she says. "I'll be back in the classroom tomorrow." Against medical advice, Morgan notes mildly, Catherine straightens, professional dignity asserting itself even in her humble living room. "My students have already missed a week with me. Continuity is essential for learning, especially for children facing instability in other areas of their lives." Morgan recognizes the argument as both genuine pedagogical principle and convenient rationalization for her return to self-sacrifice. The doctor's instructions had been clear: 2 weeks of rest before resuming work. "Actually," Morgan says, placing his briefcase on the coffee table between them, "I'm here for a different reason. There's something I need to tell you about why I was at Westside Elementary in the first place." Catherine tilts her head slightly, curiosity overcoming fatigue. "I assumed it was for your documentary on urban education. Principal Wilkins said..." "The documentary is real," Morgan interjects gently. "But it wasn't coincidence that brought me to your classroom specifically." He opens his briefcase, retrieving a manila folder. "Catherine, what do you remember about your mother's time in Clarksdale?" The unexpected question registers as confusion, then wariness on her face. "My mother? What does she have to do with your documentary?" "Everything," Morgan says quietly, opening the folder to reveal the photograph he obtained in Mississippi. Elaine and young Catherine at the community festival. Catherine's breath catches. "Where did you get this?" "I don't have many photos of her from that time. The Clarksdale Historical Society, but that's not all." Morgan carefully removes another photograph, the one from his personal journal showing the Glory film crew with Elaine and Catherine at the edge of the frame. Catherine takes this second photo with trembling hands, recognition dawning slowly. "This is the movie set, where Mom was helping with food." Her eyes widen as she looks from the photograph to Morgan. "You were there." "I was," Morgan confirms. Your mother saved our production when our catering service fell through. She worked double shifts at her restaurant, brought food to the set. Without her, we might have had to shut down filming. Catherine's fingers trace her mother's image in the photograph, a smile of remembered pride crossing her face. She talked about that film crew for years, said it was the most exciting thing to happen in Clarksdale. Her gaze returns to Morgan, more intense now. But I still don't understand what this has to do with your documentary or your visit to my classroom. Morgan takes a deep breath, the moment of truth finally arriving. Your mother and I spoke several times during that shoot. She was worried about your future, about providing the education you deserved. On the last day of filming, I found her crying behind the restaurant. She told me about her struggles as a single mother, her fears that her financial situation would limit your opportunities. Catherine's posture has gone completely still, her focus absolute. I made her a promise that day, Morgan continues. I told her I would help with your education when the time came. I gave her my contact information and told her to reach out when you were ready for college. The silence that follows feels weighted with 3 decades of unresolved obligation. Catherine breaks it with a simple question, her voice carefully neutral. Did she ever contact you? Once, Morgan acknowledges, the admission difficult despite his preparation. Shortly before she passed away, I was filming overseas. The message was taken, but he meets her eyes directly. It was misplaced, never reached me. By the time I returned, months had passed. Catherine absorbs this information, her expression unreadable. Then she rises suddenly, moving to a small desk in the corner of the room. From the bottom drawer she extracts a worn wooden box, bringing it back to her seat. My mother kept everything related to my education in this box, she explains, opening. Failed to reveal carefully preserved report cards, certificates and newspaper clippings of academic achievements. Near the bottom, she finds what she's looking for, a folded slip of paper, yellowed with age. She hands it to Morgan, wordlessly. Unfolding it, he recognizes his own handwriting from 30 years earlier, with his agent's contact information. She kept it all those years, Catherine says softly. I found it among her things after she died. I never knew what it meant. She never told me about your promise. Morgan returns the paper with care, understanding its significance as one of Catherine's few tangible connections to her mother. She was incredibly proud of you. That much was obvious even when you were a child. She sacrificed everything for my education, Catherine says, her voice taking on a new dimension of emotion. Worked 18-hour days, moved us to a smaller apartment to afford books and educational programs. Even when she got sick, she insisted I stay in college instead of coming home to help. The parallels to Catherine's own sacrificial approach toward her students hang unspoken in the air between them. Tell me more about her, Morgan requests gently. For the next half hour, Catherine shares stories of Elaine Chen, her immigration from Taiwan as a young woman, her determination to build a life in Mississippi despite the challenges, her unwavering belief in education as the path to opportunity. She used to say that knowledge was the one thing no one could ever take from you, Catherine recalls, a soft smile warming her features. When other kids got toys for Christmas, I got encyclopedia volumes and museum memberships. But she made learning an adventure, never a chore. As she speaks, Catherine gradually relaxes, the teacher becoming simply a daughter remembering her mother. Morgan listens intently, recognizing pieces of Elaine's philosophy that Catherine has clearly incorporated into her own teaching approach. Your methods with your students, Morgan observes, the way you focus on their specific needs, how you make learning relevant to their lives, that comes from her, doesn't it? Catherine nods, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Everything I know about teaching, about really seeing children as individuals, I learned from her first. She wasn't a formal educator, but she understood how to nurture potential. Morgan leans forward slightly. Catherine, I can't go back and fulfill my promise to your mother at the time it was needed. That opportunity is lost, but I believe there's still a way to honor her legacy and support the work you're doing now. He explains the concept of the Elaine Chen Educational Equity Initiative, carefully framing it as an extension of Catherine's existing approach rather than a replacement or critique. As he outlines the comprehensive program, Catherine's expression shifts from surprise to thoughtful consideration. "This would help so many children," she says when he concludes. "But why name it after my mother? Your foundation could take the credit." "Because this isn't about credit," Morgan replies simply. "It's about recognizing the philosophy that drives effective change. Your mother understood that true education addresses the whole child, including their basic needs for food, stability, and dignity. You've carried that understanding forward in your work. The initiative simply provides the resources to expand that impact without requiring your personal deprivation." Catherine is quiet for a long moment, processing. Then she asks the question Morgan has been expecting. "Why didn't you tell me about your connection to my mother when we first met at Westside?" "I didn't recognize you immediately," Morgan admits. "It was only after observing your teaching and learning your background that the pieces started coming together. Once I realized who you were, I needed time to develop something meaningful, rather than simply offering belated assistance." Catherine rises, moving to the window where afternoon light streams through thin curtains. Her reflection shows a woman at a crossroads, weighing personal pride against potential impact. "My students would benefit tremendously," she says finally, "but I don't need a position created for me. I'm a classroom teacher. That's where I belong." "You'll remain in the classroom," Morgan assures her, "but with resources that make your approach sustainable for your students and for yourself." She turns back to him, her decision evident in her posture. "I'll consider it, but I need time to think." Morgan stands, gathering his materials. "Of course. In the meantime, your class is still scheduled to attend the educational conference on Friday. The students are looking forward to it." As he prepares to leave, Catherine stops him with a final question. "Mr. Freeman, if my mother hadn't helped with your film, if we'd never met in Clarksdale, would you still be doing this?" Morgan considers the hypothetical carefully. "I believe our paths would have crossed eventually. Some connections are too important to leave to chance." He smiles slightly. "But your mother would say it's simple mathematics, the intersection of two lines traveling in the right direction." Catherine returns his smile, the first unguarded one he's seen from her. "She would say exactly that." Morgan leaves Catherine's apartment knowing that whether she recognizes it yet or not, Elaine Chen's legacy has already begun its transformation from personal sacrifice to sustainable impact. The initiative will move forward, with or without Catherine's formal participation. But her mother's daughter is too pragmatic, too dedicated to her students, to let pride stand in the way of meaningful change. Of this, Morgan is certain. Friday. Morning dawns clear and bright, Detroit's skyline crisp against a rare cloudless sky. Catherine Chen stands at the entrance to Westside Elementary, clipboard in hand as she counts students boarding the chartered bus for their field trip to the Educational Conference Center. "Everyone has their permission slips?" she asks, though she's already checked twice. Her natural thoroughness has only intensified since her illness, as if proving her recovery through meticulous attention to detail. Jamal nods, proudly straightening the collar of his dress shirt, the same one Catherine had stored in her desk, for his father's job interview. "All set, Miss Chen." Catherine smiles, the gesture reaching her eyes in a way Morgan notices hasn't been consistent since her return to teaching 3 days earlier. Despite following her doctor's recommendation for reduced hours, she's been pushing herself, arriving early to prepare materials, staying late to catch up on grading. But today, surrounded by her excited students preparing for an educational adventure, she seems truly energized. "They've missed you," Principal Wilkins observes, standing beside Morgan as they watch the boarding process. "The substitute was qualified, but she wasn't Ms. Chen." "I see that," Morgan replies. What he doesn't say is how carefully orchestrated. Today's events are, from the luxury bus now accepting students to the specially designed program awaiting them at the conference center. Catherine approaches, her clipboard tucked under her arm. "Mr. Freeman, I didn't realize you'd be joining us today." "I wouldn't miss it," he says simply. "These students have become important to me." Something in his tone causes Catherine to study him more carefully, but any questions are interrupted by Zoe calling for her assistance with a seating arrangement dispute. By the time order is restored, everyone is boarding the bus, the moment for private conversation lost. The Detroit Educational Conference Center rises impressively near downtown, its modern glass facade reflecting the morning sunlight. As students disembark, their excited chatter grows louder, eyes widening at the impressive structure. "Is this really all about math?" Tyler whispers loudly to Jamal, who shrugs with equal amazement. A young woman in professional attire approaches, greeting Catherine warmly. "Ms. Chen, I'm Rebecca from the conference center. We're so excited to have Westside Elementary with us today. If you'll follow me, we have a special program prepared." Catherine glances at Morgan, a flicker of suspicion crossing her face at the personalized welcome, but she maintains her composure, guiding her students through the soaring lobby where educational displays about mathematics in real-world applications are arranged in interactive stations. For the next hour, the students rotate through these exhibits, calculating structural loads for architectural models, exploring statistical analysis through sports performance data, and examining financial mathematics through investment simulations. Catherine moves among them, her teacher's instinct connecting concepts to individual students' interests, her face alight with the joy of seeing her classroom lessons extended into practical applications. Morgan observes from a slight distance, noting how each station has been carefully designed to appeal to specific students based on his observations of Catherine's class. Jamal excels at the sports statistics display, while Maria gravitates toward the architectural mathematics section, her careful hands assembling structural models with precision. At 11 o'clock, Rebecca returns to guide the group to what she describes as a special presentation in the main auditorium. As they enter the expansive space, Catherine falters momentarily. The room is filled not just with conference staff but with educators from across the district, city officials, and media representatives. "What is this?" she whispers to Principal Wilkins, who has appeared at her side. "Just follow Rebecca's lead," the principal advises, gently steering Catherine and her students toward seats in the front row. A large screen displays the words, "The Future of Educational Equity," above a stage, where several chairs have been arranged. Morgan slips away as the students are being seated, making his way backstage where Diana Lewis from his foundation awaits with final preparations. "Everything's ready," Diana confirms. "The mayor arrived early, and the superintendent is here. Press packets have been distributed." Morgan nods, his focus not on the dignitaries but on the reaction he anticipates from Catherine. "And the children's participation?" "Exactly as you specified." Jamal knows his cue. The lights dim slightly as a conference representative welcomes attendees and introduces the mayor, who speaks briefly about educational challenges in the city. Throughout these preliminaries, Catherine sits alert but increasingly puzzled, clearly wondering why her simple field trip has evolved into something much larger. When Morgan Freeman is introduced and walks onto the stage, a murmur of recognition ripples through the audience. Catherine's students straighten in their seats, proud of their connection to the famous figure who has spent time in their classroom. "Good morning," Morgan begins, his distinctive voice immediately commanding attention. "We've gathered today to address a critical issue affecting schools across our nation, but particularly in communities like those served by Westside Elementary." He outlines the challenges of educational inequity, the statistics of hunger among school children, the correlation between unmet basic needs and academic performance, the burden placed on teachers to fill systemic gaps with their personal resources. "These aren't just abstract problems," Morgan continues. "They're daily realities faced by students and teachers throughout our city. Rather than simply discussing the issues, I'd like to introduce someone who lives this reality every day, whose approach to these challenges offers us a model for meaningful change." Morgan turns toward the audience. "Ms. Catherine Chen, would you please join me on stage?" A spotlight finds Catherine, whose expression reflects momentary alarm, followed by composed professionalism as she rises and makes her way to the stage. Morgan greets her with a respectful handshake, guiding her to a seat beside him. "Ms. Chen teaches 5th grade at Westside Elementary," Morgan explains to the audience. "For 12 years, she has served students facing significant challenges: hunger, housing instability, family health crises. But what makes her approach remarkable isn't just her dedication, it's her methodology of addressing the whole child, while preserving their dignity. Catherine sits perfectly still, her posture revealing nothing of her internal reaction to being suddenly thrust into the spotlight. "I've spent the past 2 weeks observing Ms. Chen's classroom," Morgan continues. "I've witnessed her creating systems of support that don't just feed hungry children, but empower them to learn and grow. So I've seen how she transforms lives, not through grand gestures, but through consistent, thoughtful action." He turns slightly toward Catherine. "What I observed was a teacher continuing the legacy of educational equity first taught to her by her mother, Elaine Chen, a woman whose belief in education as the path to opportunity shaped her daughter's approach to teaching." At the mention of her mother, Catherine's composed expression softens visibly. Morgan reaches into his jacket pocket, retrieving the photograph from Clarksdale. "Elaine Chen understood that true learning cannot happen when basic needs go unmet," Morgan says, his voice gentle as he passes the photograph to Catherine. "She sacrificed to ensure her daughter had every educational opportunity. Today, Catherine Chen makes similar sacrifices for her students, often at significant personal cost." Morgan turns back to the audience. "But individual sacrifice, however, noble cannot solve systemic problems. That's why today I'm announcing the establishment of the Elaine Chen Educational Equity Initiative." On the screen behind them, details of the program appear. The $10 million endowment, the comprehensive approach to student support, the Teacher Resource Fund, the expansion to multiple schools throughout the district. As Morgan outlines the initiative, Catherine's expression transforms from professional composure to gradual understanding. By the time he describes the Director of Student Support Services position designed for her, allowing her to remain in the classroom while coordinating broader implementation, tears have formed in her eyes, though she blinks them back with characteristic restraint. This initiative, Morgan concludes, isn't charity, it's an investment in proven methodology. It's recognition that addressing educational inequity requires resources, not just individual sacrifice. And most importantly, it's a tribute to the philosophy that Elaine Chen instilled in her daughter, that every child deserves the opportunity to learn unburdened by hunger, insecurity, or lack of basic necessities. He turns to Catherine. "Ms. Chen, would you like to say a few words?" Catherine rises slowly, visibly processing the magnitude of what's just been announced. She glances toward her students in the front row, where Jamal gives her an encouraging nod. "Thank you, Mr. Freeman," she begins, her voice finding strength as she speaks. "My mother would be overwhelmed by this honor. She believed education was the most powerful force for change in a child's life. But she also understood that children cannot learn when their basic needs aren't met." As Catherine continues describing her approach and vision with eloquence born of deep conviction, Morgan watches her students' faces. They beam with pride, seeing their teacher recognized for what they've always known, that her quiet, consistent care has transformed their lives in ways that extend far beyond academic instruction. When Catherine concludes, the applause is thunderous, but it's what happens next that completes the carefully orchestrated announcement. Jamal rises from his seat, followed by Maria, Tyler, and Zoe. They approach the stage with dignity beyond their years, each carrying a single flower. "Ms. Chen," Jamal says, his voice amplified by the microphone Morgan subtly angles toward him. "You've always been there for us. Now we get to be there for you." As the children present their flowers, the true meaning of the initiative becomes clear. Not just institutional support, but a community of care reflecting the values Catherine has embodied throughout her teaching career. The announcement, complete. The future transformed by a promise finally fulfilled. 6 months after the announcement of the Elaine Chen Educational Equity Initiative, Morgan Freeman stands in the doorway of room 137 at Westside Elementary, observing a classroom transformed, not by lavish renovations, but by subtle, meaningful changes. The most obvious difference is in the students themselves. Jamal, whose hunger first caught Morgan's attention, now approaches the whiteboard with confident strides, his frame slightly filled out, his focus undistracted by physical need. Zoe, whose brother's illness had once dominated her thoughts, raises her hand frequently, her participation no longer overshadowed by family health concerns. Tyler, who had carried the weight of his father's cancer, shows a resilience that comes from proper support rather than premature responsibility. Catherine Chen remains at the center of this transformation, her teaching style unchanged in its personalized approach and high expectations. What has changed is the strain that once shadowed her movements, the desperate calculations that played behind her eyes as she tried to stretch insufficient resources to meet overwhelming needs. The square of the hypotenuse equals the sum of the squares of the other two sides, she explains, drawing a right triangle on the board. But why does this matter in real life? Hands shoot up across the classroom, more hands than Morgan remembers. From his initial observations, for building things, Maria offers, like when the architecture team visited last month, they showed us how they use the Pythagorean theorem to make sure corners are square. Catherine nods approvingly. Excellent connection, Maria. The reference to the architecture team reflects another change. The enrichment programs now regularly available to West Side students through initiative partnerships. Local professionals visit monthly, connecting academic concepts to career applications, expanding students' vision of their own possibilities. When the lunch bell rings, students file out in orderly excitement. Morgan steps aside, acknowledging their greetings as they pass. Many know him now not just as a famous actor, but as a regular presence in their educational community. Mr. Freeman, Catherine says, approaching once the room has emptied. I didn't know you were visiting today. I wanted to see the progress firsthand, he explains. The quarterly reports are impressive, but they don't capture the human element. Catherine smiles, the expression reaching her eyes in a way it rarely did during their first encounters. Would you like to join us in the cafeteria? The new nutrition program has made quite a difference. They walk together through hallways that feel more vibrant, not because of physical renovations, though some have occurred, but because of the energy that flows through the school. Teachers greet them with relaxed smiles, rather than the strained expressions Morgan remembers from his early visits. In the cafeteria, the transformation is particularly evident. Fresh fruits and vegetables accompany balanced meals on every tray. No student checks their account balance with anxiety. No child hides hunger behind embarrassment. A nutritionist works alongside cafeteria staff, ensuring meals meet both health standards and student preferences. We've seen attendance improve 15%, Catherine explains as they observe the lunch period. Nurse visits are down nearly 30%. It turns out well-fed children get sick less often and focus better. And the family support component, Catherine's expression grows thoughtful. That's where we're seeing the deepest impact. Jamal's father found stable employment through our Job Connection program. Zoe's brother's asthma is properly managed now that the family has healthcare navigation assistance. Tyler's father. She pauses, emotion briefly crossing her face. His treatment options expanded significantly with the specialized referrals. They take seats at a small table in the corner, where Catherine now eats her own lunch, rather than sacrificing it for students. Morgan notices how she's regained healthy weight, how the perpetual exhaustion has lifted from her features. The initiative has expanded to 5 schools now, she continues, professional pride evident in her voice. We're developing training, materials, so other districts can implement similar programs. I'm consulting with the State Education Department next month about broader policy changes. And how are you balancing these new responsibilities with teaching? The reduced classroom schedule helps, Catherine acknowledges. 3 days teaching, 2 days coordinating initiative activities. It's still demanding, but sustainable in a way my previous approach wasn't. Morgan nods, noting how she emphasizes sustainability, the concept that had been missing from her self-sacrificial model. Any challenges? He asks. Catherine considers the question seriously. Scaling without losing personalization is difficult. Each school has different needs, each community its own dynamics. We're learning that the program can't be identical everywhere. It needs to flex while maintaining core principles. Their conversation pauses as Jamal approaches their table, no longer the desperately hungry boy Morgan first observed, but a confident young math enthusiast. Ms. Chen, I finished testing the new tutoring software, he reports. I think it'll really help the third graders with multiplication. But they might need headphones. The audio feedback gets distracting in a group setting. Excellent observation, Jamal, Catherine responds. Would you write up your recommendations for the technology committee? The boy nods, clearly pleased. At being taken seriously, he acknowledges Morgan with comfortable familiarity before returning to his friends. He's showing strong aptitude for educational technology design, Catherine explains after he leaves. The initiative's mentorship program connected him with a software developer who's helping him explore that interest. After lunch, they tour the school's new resource center, formerly an underutilized storage room, now converted into a space where families can access computers, assistance with paperwork, and connections to community services. A parent volunteer helps another family navigate healthcare enrollment forms, while a social worker consults quietly with a father about housing options. This was my mother's vision, Catherine says softly, surveying the busy room. Education, extending beyond classroom walls to address whatever stands between a child and learning. Outside in the playground, recently equipped with safe, modern equipment through an initiative partnership with a local business, students play with the unreserved energy of children whose basic needs are met. There's something I've been wanting to show you, Catherine says, leading Morgan to a newly planted garden area at the edge of the playground. The students designed this themselves. In the center of the garden, surrounded by flowering plants beginning to bloom in the spring sunshine, stands a small plaque. The Elaine Chen Memorial Garden, Where Dreams Take Root. Established 2023. Morgan reads the inscription, unexpectedly moved by this tangible reminder of the woman whose brief intersection with his life decades ago has flowered into such meaningful impact. The students researched her favorite flowers, Catherine explains, pointing to vibrant red blooms. These are Chinese hibiscus. She always tried to grow them in Mississippi, though the climate wasn't ideal. As they stand in the garden, several students approach with watering cans, tending the plants with careful attention. One explains to Morgan how they're tracking plant growth as part of a science project, measuring the effects of different care techniques. Later, as Morgan prepares to leave, Catherine walks him to his car. The afternoon sun casts long shadows across the school grounds, where after-school programs now engage students who previously would have returned to empty homes. You know, Catherine says reflectively, when you first told me about your promise. To my mother, I wasn't sure how to feel. Part of me wondered how different my life might have been if that connection hadn't been lost. Morgan nods, understanding the complicated emotions inherent in their shared history. But I've come to believe, she continues, that things happened as they needed to. My journey made me the teacher I am, and perhaps the initiative is more meaningful now, affecting hundreds of children rather than just one. Your mother would be proud, Morgan says simply. Of both of us, I think, Catherine replies, for finding our way back to a promise worth keeping. As Morgan drives away from Westside Elementary, he reflects on the nature of ripple effects, how a single encounter on a Mississippi film set decades ago has expanded into concentric circles of impact, touching lives neither he nor Elaine Chen could have imagined. The initiative bearing her name now serves as a model being studied by educators across the country. Catherine has been invited to speak at national conferences, sharing methodology refined through years of hands-on experience. Most importantly, children like Jamal, Zoe, and Tyler face futures no longer limited by hunger, healthcare gaps, or lack of support. Morgan smiles, thinking of something Catherine had said during their lunch conversation. The most powerful educational tool isn't technology or curriculum. It's removing the barriers that prevent children from accessing their own potential. Elaine Chen had understood this fundamental truth. Her daughter had implemented it through personal sacrifice. And now, through an initiative born of a delayed promise finally fulfilled, that understanding ripples outward, creating change that will continue long after all of them are gone. Some promises, Morgan reflects, as the school recedes in his rearview mirror, arrive late but echo forever.